The drama surrounding the Indiana Fever didn't begin this week. It didn't begin with a leaked team meeting, a frustrating loss in Portland, or even the growing questions surrounding Caitlin Clark and the Fever locker room. In many ways, it began 8 months ago, on a playoff court where the Atlanta Dream watched a season they thought belonged to them suddenly disappear. That memory has lingered ever since, quietly sitting in the background while Atlanta rebuilt itself and Indiana tried to become one of the league's rising powers. Now, those two stories are crashing into each other once again, and the timing couldn't be more dangerous for the Fever. Last September, Atlanta believed it was ready to contend for something special. The Dream had won 30 games, earned the third seed, and entered the playoffs carrying the confidence of a team that expected to make a deep run. When they took Game 1 of their first-round series against Indiana, everything seemed to be unfolding exactly as planned. The Fever were talented, but Atlanta had the better record, more experience, and home court advantage. From the outside, it looked like a series the Dream should eventually control. Then, something unexpected happened. Indiana refused to go away. The Fever stole Game 2, forcing a winner-take-all showdown in Atlanta, and suddenly the pressure shifted. What was supposed to be a comfortable playoff run became a fight for survival. Even then, Atlanta appeared to be in control. They entered halftime of the deciding game with a 7-point lead and a crowd ready to celebrate a trip to the next round. But playoff basketball has a way of exposing every weakness, and as the second half unfolded, Indiana kept finding answers. Possession after possession, the Fever chipped away at the deficit. Every Atlanta mistake felt larger than the one before it. The confidence that had carried the Dream through a franchise record season slowly began turning into tension. By the time the final buzzer sounded, Indiana had completed the comeback, escaping with an 87-85 victory and sending Atlanta home. What made the loss even more painful was the reality of who had beaten them. This wasn't a fully healthy Fever team operating at maximum strength. Caitlin Clark, the face of the franchise and the biggest star in women's basketball, wasn't even on the floor. She had already been ruled out. Somehow, a sixth-seeded team without its superstar had walked into Atlanta and ended a 30-win season. That kind of loss doesn't disappear when the offseason begins. It follows players into workouts. It lingers in film sessions. It becomes motivation during training camp. For Atlanta, the memory never left. Jordan Canada promised the Dream would be back, and the organization spent the next several months making sure that promise meant something. Rather than tearing apart the roster after a disappointing playoff exit, Atlanta doubled down. The front office kept the core together. They trusted the identity they had built and convinced themselves that the playoff collapse wasn't proof they were flawed. It was proof they had unfinished business. Now that belief has transformed into results. Atlanta enters this matchup looking like one of the strongest teams in the entire league. Alicia Gray continues to play at an elite level, reminding everyone why she finished among the MVP candidates last season. Rhyne remains one of the most complete two-way players in basketball, capable of changing games on both ends of the floor. Around them, the Dream have constructed a roster that thrives on discipline, physicality, and defensive pressure. This isn't a team searching for confidence. It's a team operating with purpose. They know who they are, they know how they want to play, and perhaps most importantly, they know exactly who they're coming to face. While Atlanta spent the week preparing for revenge, Indiana spent the week trying to stop the bleeding. The Fever arrive at this game carrying far more questions than answers. Consecutive losses exposed problems that have been quietly growing beneath the surface. First came a heartbreaking defeat against Golden State, then came the blowout loss in Portland, a game that seemed to reveal every weakness Indiana had been trying to hide. The frustration was impossible to ignore. Players looked disconnected. Defensive mistakes piled up. Communication broke down. By the time the game ended, everyone knew something had to change. That's why the meeting happened. Behind closed doors, coaches and players gathered for nearly 2 hours in an attempt to address the growing concerns surrounding the team. These weren't the types of conversations contenders expect to have in early June. Yet Indiana found itself at a crossroads. Only 8 games into the season, the fact that news of the meeting leaked almost immediately only intensified the scrutiny. Suddenly, what should have been an internal discussion became national news. Every comment was analyzed. Every quote became a headline. The Fever weren't just battling opponents anymore. They were battling perception. What makes the situation particularly concerning is that Indiana's biggest issue isn't scoring. The Fever can score with almost anyone. Their offense remains one of the most explosive in the league. The real problem exists on the other end of the floor. Defense has become the team's biggest weakness. And unfortunately for Indiana, Atlanta happens to be one of the worst possible opponents to face while trying to solve defensive problems. The Dream specialize in exposing mistakes. They force teams into uncomfortable situations and capitalize on every breakdown. Against lesser opponents, Indiana might be able to survive defensive inconsistency. Against Atlanta, every mistake could become a turning point. That brings the focus directly back to Caitlin Clark, because no matter what happens around the Fever, the spotlight always finds its way back to her. Over the past week, Clark has spent as much time answering questions about team dynamics as she has preparing for basketball games. Discussions about her relationship with coaches, her leadership role, and the overall direction of the franchise have dominated headlines. Now she faces a challenge that may be even more difficult. She must lead a team trying to find itself against an opponent that already knows exactly what it wants. Standing across from her will be Rhyne, a player who has never backed down from the Clark matchup. Their previous battles have been physical, emotional, and highly competitive. Howard understands the assignment. She knows slowing Clark down changes everything for Indiana. The Dream know it too. That's why Thursday night's game feels less like a regular season contest and more like a test of identity. Atlanta arrives carrying months of motivation and revenge. Indiana arrives carrying questions about chemistry, consistency, and leadership. One team is attempting to validate everything it believes about itself. The other is trying to prove it hasn't lost its way. And that's what makes this game so fascinating. The Dream only need to focus on winning a basketball game. The Fever have to win a basketball game while simultaneously convincing themselves, their fans, and the rest of the league that the cracks forming beneath the surface aren't becoming something bigger. That's a much heavier burden to carry. When the lights come on and the national audience starts watching, the pressure won't be equally distributed. It will fall squarely on Indiana's shoulders. By Thursday night, one team will walk away feeling validated. Atlanta could finally get the revenge it has been chasing since last September. Indiana could silence the doubts that have surrounded the organization all week. But only one outcome is possible. And as Rhyne steps onto the court carrying 8 months of unfinished business, Caitlin Clark may discover that the toughest opponent isn't Atlanta's defense. It might be the pressure of holding an entire franchise together while one of the best teams in the East comes looking for payback.